I am Richard Stanley, c'est moi, author, filmmaker, rogue anthropologist, paranormal journalist, and veteran of 1,000 psychic wars.
I want to invite you to a new world, to my world, a shadowland that exists one step away from what you take to be reality, a slide zone between fact and fiction, fact and truth, a place where magic and miracles still hold currency. The Otherworld lies sublime, out of space and out of time.
Welcome to the Otherworld, and I'm really blessed with the company that I have here today in the heart of the Devil's Pentagram. We have relic hunter Hamilton White, who may be known to you from the television show Lost Relics of the Knights Templar and the discovery of the Tomar Hoard, which was kind of a buzz issue 2 years ago.
Yeah, if you're in America, you might possibly have seen me on the Discovery Channel. I think I'm being repeated again at the moment. And I was sort of an anonymous little man until I got on television, which seems to have turned into a horror story. Because what I never realised is how uninterested people are in listening to the truth and factually correct information. And then it goes beyond that they actually want to block you because they'd rather listen to gibberish and stupidity and made up nonsense instead, which is just unbelievably frustrating when you've got some fabulous stories that you'd really like to get out there and you simply can't.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I guess for those genre nerds out there, Ham's one part Indiana Jones, and I guess maybe 3 parts ecumenical Edwards, the Ned Beatty character from Exorcist II: The Heretic. But yeah, Ham is a real-life trader and collector of religious relics and ancient artifacts. And in the course of his work, he's turned over a bunch of anomalous items, little inconvenient pieces of archaeology that don't fit into any of the current theories about our civilization. And having examined Ham's relics firsthand, I've touched them and seen them myself. This is, no joke whatsoever. And it also galls us hugely that folk are able to drag entire television series like the Oak Island affair out of not much more than a spent nail. You know, like one rusty nail is pretty much all they got on Oak Island.
Yep.
And in the meantime, you can have a wealth of data, which you simply can't get anyone to look at.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, I'm not a great television watcher, simply because it frustrates me too much. And I mean, as Richard has just said, the worst of offenders on television is the appalling History Channel Oak Island, which is just simply a money-making machine. It's not a history program. It's not a treasure hunting program anymore. It's simply a corruption of what was a very good story 150 years ago that's been spun into just nonsense. It fluctuates from Vikings to Knights Templars to, just whatever bizarre fantasist who wants to get himself on television is prepared to say yes to. And, you know, it blocks a lot of people being able to come on TV or get programs made. I mean, not just me. There's people down in Florida doing some fabulous shipwreck excavation. All manner of things, factually correct, turning up wonderful things with great stories, and nobody will take it on. And yet we're into series 12 or 13 and episode 34 of somebody finds a rusty nail. It is just, beggars belief why this rubbish is allowed to carry on. And I mean, we're at the moment, I mean, me and Richard, we're working on all sorts of things. We've just finished off a few books, but we're now trying to look at another thing I've been involved with, which crosses over with Richard and the Lovecraft and what you and Hal have been talking about, which is sort of, I suppose you call it alien technologies or completely anomalous technologies. But we do have some objects that really merit some serious scientific study, and we're banging our head against a brick wall.
Yeah, and you're getting that from the horse's mouth, because Ham used to work for the History Channel, and I think he knows how these things happen.
Yeah.
But we're not here to whinge. Instead, we would like to use this opportunity to try to unpack some of the inconvenient truths and some of the data that has been hidden away. And no better place to start than the Call of Cthulhu and the notion that there is something at the bottom of our ocean that the authorities are really not keen on telling us about.
100%.
It's a weird bit of business, and this we cannot give you the actual coordinates, I think, because that's
not precisely, but we can indicate more or less what it is and what it's all about. You know, I operate all over the world, really. I have done. But, you know, setting the scene for what we've got, if you look at ancient technologies, just take the Egyptians, for example, the building of the pyramids, the cutting of stone, the carving of certain materials that on the face of it seems impossible, because how were certain stones cut with copper tools? It shouldn't really have happened. When you look inside the pyramids that are completely painted on every surface beautifully on the inside, well, how was that accomplished? Because it's completely black inside a pyramid. There's no lighting to see what you're doing. And nowhere on any of these pyramids is the slightest bit of smoke residue. So very clearly candles weren't being lit, the oil lamps weren't being used. So going back into the ancient world, how were people seeing in the pitch black? How are they doing it? I mean, this is one of the things I've been talking to Richard about that he's keen to get involved with, which is a piece of ancient technology called the Baghdad Battery.
Yeah, let's rewind a little on that, leaving the pyramids aside for a moment and returning to the watery depths of dread Relic and Yarnith Ley. How this began is, I believe, a treasure hunter started towing a sonar bar across a section of water off the European coast and started finding anomalous sonar readings.
Yep.
How long ago is this?
It started off about 15, 18 years ago. A friend of mine, who amateur archaeologist, very well self-educated historian and a scuba diver, who'd been diving on a number of sites and thought he'd seen some things that really didn't make sense to his eye. So he saved up his money. I mean, he's not a wealthy guy by any means, but he saved up and bought the sort of sonar scanner you drag behind a little rubber dinghy, and spent quite a long time combing very, very carefully and very systematically several areas. Well, I can tell you, it's in the Mediterranean, close to him. And really the sonar was showing up what, through his experience, really did seem to indicate the outlines or the footings of buildings at a depth between about 30 and 90 feet down, that no civilization, there seemed to be no record of anybody ever having these sites that are big enough to call small towns. They're not isolated little buildings, they're distinct streets. You know, it was just a thing that he became fascinated and almost obsessed by, because he just couldn't put the civilization down. It wasn't something that was natural to his country. It certainly wasn't a Roman thing. The only other thing he could look at was, well, there were Phoenicians around that area, but not at the point that they were building constructions of the size that what his sonar scans were showing up. So after doing his sonar scans and having, of course, the exact coordinates, he arranged to get some satellite photos done, which, going back that time, you could use the American military satellites for a commercial basis, and had the satellite photographs taken by the US military, which again, from the cutting-edge technology the military had got, very, very clearly confirmed that the sonar scans were matching up exactly with what he was getting from the satellite imagery. And, well, from there, he started doing a little bit of diving on the site and started recovering some very, very interesting artifacts off the surface. And quite a number of these artifacts, simply didn't make sense in archaeological terms being found in the Western world. Well, it didn't really make sense being found at all, because they didn't really exist. And they certainly shouldn't exist in the Western Hemisphere. And then I talked to Richard about it, and it's like, we really ought to do something about this.
Yeah, I mean, just to recap, what we're talking about here are enormous geometric structures on the seafloor. And what's convincing about it is that the satellite photographs match the sonar scans. We can be pretty sure that there is something down there. And then beyond that, we also have the relics, the various pieces that have been dredged up from the seafloor, which tend to indicate some form of ancient industrial process. I mean, certainly the amount of heat that would be needed to generate some of that stuff. And there's you talk about the graphite, is it?
Well, there are two major anomalies out of the pieces that have come to the surface. Firstly, some of the items appear to be made from graphite, which, firstly, there are no sources of graphite within something like 2,500 miles of where this site is. And secondly, graphite wasn't really discovered until the early Middle Ages and really had no use whatsoever until probably the 15th, 16th century, when it was used in manufacturing cannonballs of all things. So that throws up two questions: is how on earth did graphite find its way 2,500 miles to the south of where the nearest mine is? And secondly, well, what on earth are these artifacts doing being made of graphite in the first place, when everybody else at the same period around the world was more or less using bronze, because we're talking pre-Iron Age? Well, why do these little group of graphite pieces exist at all, just from this one underwater site? And secondly, there were some other materials which at the moment they're not identifiable. They're actually in the scientific laboratory at the moment while we try and find out even what the materials are. There's a very peculiar sample of what looks like a purpley coloured metal that has another metal bonded to it, and thus far we simply can't even identify what they are. But the most significant piece out of the whole group is what appears to be only the second Baghdad Battery that's ever been found. And I mean, Richard knows more about that than I do.
Okay, so Baghdad Battery, what we're talking about here are basically...
it's ancient technology.
Yeah, ancient technology. It's basically the equivalent of a rock with a metal core. With the metal core structured in such a way as to potentially hold electricity. And we can assume that these things were used to store electricity. At a point in time, of course, when electricity wasn't supposed to exist.
Yeah.
Now, they've been called Baghdad batteries because the first of these relics obviously came from Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, the story of the first one that was found, well, the only one that's ever been recorded to be found, was found over in the Middle East, I believe somewhere, 100 or so years ago. I don't know the exact date. And it, as Richard described it, it appears to be some form of conductivity device that the general words of wisdom from those that have looked at it feel that it could possibly be part of a very early form of battery. Now, it was on display in the Baghdad Museum, and then mysteriously at the start of the Gulf War, it completely vanished into thin air. Nobody knows where it's gone. Nobody's prepared to actually say whether it was looted by Iraqis, whether it was taken by American forces. It simply just vanished into thin air, and no real proper scientific study has ever really been done on it. The general talk that has happened around it is really hypothetical, because there hasn't been a proper serious scientific study done on it. And now it's been conveniently made to disappear into thin air. Well, we can't do it. Nothing can be gleaned from it. It's gone. And I mean, I'm sure it's never going to be coming back. But this is where the story of my thing starts to get a little bit sinister, because the Baghdad Battery that I have, when you look at the pictures of the one that was found over in the Middle East, it's almost identical. Mine's a little bit bigger, but it's exactly the same thing. Totally real. I mean, it's still got barnacle incrustations on it from where it's taken off the surface of the seabed. But the story, this is where it gets, difficult, because, as we were trying to say, people suppress the truth. Richard, you know the story a little bit. You want to do it, or shall I?
Well, I think dive in. I mean, first of
Okay.
all, the man who took the sonar scans was intimidated and scared off the case.
Oh, totally. I mean, he would have been probably in his mid-50s when he was doing this. And he'd been on this project for quite a number of years. But it was a slow process, funding it and doing everything himself. He never discussed it with anybody. And he'd been diving on and off, pulling out sort of little pottery bits and stone bits and all manner of things. And one Sunday afternoon, he had a knock on his door. Now, he's got a family kind of farm out in the countryside, and he's got a townhouse where he spends most of his time. And one Sunday afternoon, he got a knock on the door at his townhouse, looked out the window, and there were 2 army trucks parked outside. The second truck was full of 8 uniformed and armed military-clad officers. But the first truck and the people who knocked on his door were just simply people wearing military uniform, but all in black, no insignia, no rank insignia, badges, nothing. Just the sort of comedic men in black that nobody thinks exist. They basically forced their way into the house, sat him on the sofa, told him that they knew exactly what he'd been doing, they knew exactly how long he'd been doing it, and it was time for him to stop. They made some fairly direct threats that said, if you're caught diving or seen diving on these sites again, you will have a diving accident and you will not come to the surface. And then they completely stripped his house of all his artifacts, his computers, in those days floppy disk files that he was keeping stuff on, and basically stripped his house. It's gone, that's the end of it. And I mean, absolutely frightened the life out of him. And he never discussed it again. He backed off. He didn't dive again. He did no further research on the site. Now, bear in mind, this happened many, many years before I knew him. And it was about 3 years ago now, I was over chatting with him, because he's a guy I do a lot of business with, and he's a great guy to talk to because he's very knowledgeable. And he just handed me a shoebox full of stuff and a great file full of maps and coordinates and photographs and all sorts of things. And he told me the story, and he said, I can't do anything. These are the pieces that were at my mother's house when I got raided. Nobody's ever seen them. Nobody knows they exist. I can't be seen with them. Here's this box, take it away. You're the only person that can do something with it. And, I spoke with Richard about it, and it's like, well, where the hell can we go with this?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously extremely excited when Ham told me about this, particularly once I saw that the geometric structures found by the sonar scans were confirmed by the satellite data. And I find it staggering that nobody is bothering to even report the finding, let alone investigate it. And beyond that, of course, I've been working for a number of years on the Cthulhu mythos, on the Lovecraft franchise. In fact, at the point when these artifacts, the so-called Baghdad Battery, basically fell onto the tabletop. I was busy working on an adaptation of Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, I mean, it was a case of, well, the world should be jumping up and down wanting to study this. You know, it's a fantastic discovery, and it's actual positive confirmation that you can put on the table. This isn't Oak Island waffle about a rusty nail. This is genuine historically important pieces, totally anomalous to anything else. The scientific and academic community will be jumping up and down to examine this stuff. Nothing. It's almost as though, no, it doesn't exist. No, not even going to talk to you. You can't get anywhere.
Yeah, and I guess it wouldn't be going too far for me to note that this is somewhere on the ocean floor off southwestern Europe. And what we have here in southern Europe since time immemorial has been this ancient pilgrimage route, the Compostela to Santiago pilgrimage route, where pilgrims walk every year to the most southwesterly point of Europe, which is a remote location named Finisterre, the end of the earth, that lies just beyond Santiago de Compostela. Now, this pilgrimage is tendency of people to walk towards the setting sun and to migrate to the most southwesterly bit of land in the continent has been going on for thousands of years, since well before the Christian era. The Holy Roman Church, working the way the Holy Roman Church has always done, hijacked the pilgrimage by saying that everyone has to go to Santiago because St. James is buried there. Take it from me, St. James is not buried in Santiago de Compostela. There is nothing Christian about the origins of the Compostela pilgrimage route. That's the reason that all the pilgrims carry small shells in their hats. I think I'm even using one of the shells as an ashtray at this very moment, the symbol of Santiago de Compostela. But the truth of the matter is that they're drawn towards the section of water and to the very edge of the land, a bit similar to what you encounter in Lovecraft's narrative, the Call of Cthulhu. Right at the edge of Finisterre, there's a stone altar, something called the Ara Solis, which presumably is the ultimate point of the pilgrimage. And even more bizarrely, when you get there, there's a big signpost in Spanish warning you that ahead lie the waters of the great octopus, of the giant octopus. And I don't know whether people have been unconsciously following some kind of blood impulse, or whether there's some force that calls people as far as they can to the southwest till you reach the edge of the sea. But I hate to say it, down there on the ocean floor,
there's something there.
There's something there.
We can prove that. We can put it on the table. If we could find someone to either back us or who was prepared to actually do some proper historical research and filming, we've got a wonderful story sitting there. But we're just stumped because nobody on television seems to be prepared to want to do anything. They just want regurgitated nonsense that they can sell around the world, and it doesn't really matter how pointless and banal it is. That makes the money. TV's a business. Sorry, Mr. White, not interested in listening to you talking about history. Bugger off. And it's sad. Very, very sad.
Now, I hate to whinge, but yeah, I've encountered identical problems on the Otto Rahn case. Otto Rahn, of course, was the German Jewish Braille historian who unfortunately ended up working for the Ahnenerbe SS, the Nazi archaeological department. And in the course of my investigation of the Rahn affair, I became very interested in these anomalous black stones, which are found at a deep strata underneath the Ariège. Apparently meteorites, they might also be tektites. Rahn identified them with the black stone of Parsifal. In Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal, the Holy Grail is explicitly described as a black stone that has rejuvenative properties, a black bleeding stone, named Lapis Exilus is the name given to it in Wolfram's Parsifal. And in the course of the Rahn affair, I discovered that these black stones actually exist. When I first heard about them, I thought it was high fantasy. But lo and behold, the damn things actually bleed. Not only do they bleed, they don't rust, they're also magnetic. And we can't figure out what they are because they're unlike pretty much anything else I've ever seen. It's been suggested that they're possibly identical to the black stone of the Kaaba, which lies at the center of Islam and is the whole point of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, to the black stone that all Muslims are supposed to perform once in their lifetime. And moreover, every Muslim on earth is supposed to align themselves to the black stone when they pray. They always have to face towards Mecca and be aligned towards this black stone, which is allegedly some kind of meteorite, a Lovecraftian piece of the great outside that's found its way to Earth. And in the course of the Ran affair, I've turned up hundreds of these stones from the deep strata beneath these mountains, beneath the Ariège. You can find them in the caves and in the glacier-cut gorges. Big glaciers came through here during the Ice Age and plowed some of the stuff to the surface. But I assume it's lain there for millions of years. But since turning them up, I have taken samples of these alleged meteorites / tektites to the British Museum, to their meteorite department. I've given samples to people at Cambridge, to responsible people. And every single time they've basically deferred. Years have gone by, and then ultimately the samples have become lost before anyone has actually conducted a simple spectrographic analysis, which we need to do in order to place these stones within a known human taxonomy, because otherwise there's a very real possibility that they might be a hitherto undiscovered mineral element. They certainly may have a real military industrial function as superconductors. I mean, one of the problems we have on Earth is that the heaviest available element we have is uranium. And they have to artificially enrich it to make it into plutonium, which makes it radioactive. And obviously uranium and plutonium are rather limited in their usages.
What you can do with it.
And I personally would very much like to know what the black stones are, but have started to despair of ever getting a scientist or a laboratory or anyone who is prepared to actually run a test or examine the material. We've had these samples ever since 1998 was where I turned them up, and now
it's 25 years.
25 years later, I've still
that.
not been able to get anyone, any laboratory time, nor have I been able to get any expert advice to actually classify them or identify them. They remain fictional or fantastical items, even though they exist, and I have them here on my table.
Yeah, I mean, for people who probably don't know, I met Richard through the Otto Rahn story because it was part of my research that had crisscrossed with Templars and coming down to Occitania and filming the series we did. And I mean, God, we could make 20 programs on the problems that have been caused. But again, Otto Rahn or anything, even with some vague, tenuous reference, however historically correct, with research that was done on, by the Nazi Party, by possible members, any connection, however vague, you suddenly become the leper of society again. I mean, we've both been the victims of this simply by stating publicly, this is what Otto Rahn did between 1929 and 1933-34. He came to Occitania, he was chasing the Grail myths, he wrote a book. All anybody wants to scream at you, he was a Nazi. Well, hold on a minute. Otto came here, did his research. The research was done. He funded it himself. There's nothing to do with the Nazi Party. He was forced into a situation because if you know the politics of how things were working in Germany before World War II started, you simply backed into a corner. If the party paymaster summoned you, you had no choice. And I mean, the only way the chap could continue his research was by being forced into being a member of the Nazi Party because he had no money. And I mean, that's factually correct. It's not us trying to fudge a story or trying to justify, particularly Richard, who's been doing this for nearly 30 years. It was a fascinating study of a guy who grew up in the Black Forest in Germany, spent his childhood and youth studying mythology and legends, worked, paid for himself to come down to the Occitania, and he was the first person to start spreading Occitanian history around the world. Nothing had been published until Otto came on the scene, absolutely nothing at all. And I mean, we have been attacked like you wouldn't believe. You know, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the problems Richard's had, but I've been on the receiving end of it as a byproduct simply by appearing on television and telling a story about Otto Rahn. I mean, there's been things on the internet. I mean, I forget exactly what I was called. I know I was called a moron by somebody who spelt the word moron wrong. Then I was scum. What else was I? I was an anti-Semite. What else?
Yeah,
was I
no,
called?
all the usual.
The usual, yeah.
I mean, one of the deep ironies of the situation is that Ham really became my friend pretty much because we were attacked by the same people.
Exactly the same in half-wits.
Yeah, there's nothing like shedding blood together and having shared enemies to on which to found friendships. So in fact, getting to know Ham was one of the great boons of these last few years, and nor are we the only ones to have suffered this fate. In fact, pretty much every single researcher who has been
anybody who's touched the subject,
who has been working on the subject of the Ahnenerbe SS and the Nazi archaeological group has been attacked, and their work essentially discredited over the last few years, which is, I think, a deliberate move by certain parties to remove a tranche of data from libraries and from schools and from public knowledge to effectively erase a part of history.
Yeah.
And when this comes to the Cathars, this is a burning issue, literally, because the Inquisition and the witch hunters and various other folk have been burning people here for hundreds of years to try to keep sections of our history and parts of essentially the wisdom of the ancients, the occult science of our forgotten ancestors, secret.
Yeah, and I mean, sort of, when this appeared to be carrying on and becoming more aggressive against us, well, it's right. You know what? We haven't actually done anything wrong. We're simply trying to put out factually provable information that's not really been put out before in the English language. So I really gave Richard a kick because he's been working for decades, isn't it, on the ultimate sort of Otto Rahn biography. And I just get pushing and pushing, and he's right, we've just got to get your book out, because the only way we can deal with this sort of stuff is we've got to finish the book. So I gave Richard earache and ear bending for months to actually force him to take the manuscript, and I tried to help where I could. And we had a good friend of ours, Lisa from America, who did some great work. And fairly recently, I mean, we're only talking 6 months ago, we actually got some books done. We had to pay for them ourselves to get them out because, as usual, you can't find a publisher. But Richard, tell about that.
Yeah, and the end result is The Last Crusade, which is an attempt to pull together everything that I know about the Rahn case, and basically all of the crazy things that have happened in the course of following the trial. It's your story,
isn't it? It's partly Richard's biography from coming down here 30 years ago by accident, being sent down as a researcher, not finding what he was actually supposed to be researching, but sort of dropping on this curious character called Otto Rahn. And like, whoa, this is a marvellous story, isn't it? This guy, the world's never heard of him.
Yeah, in point of fact, the real reason I came here at the very off was because I was hired as a researcher by Channel 4 Television to research the backstory to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and to see if there was any truth or any factual underpinnings to Lawrence Kasdan's script. Channel 4 had a hit with a show called The Real Jurassic Park about retrieving dinosaur DNA from amber, and they wanted to repeat the process by doing a real life Raiders of the Lost Ark. So they dispatched me, Muggins, to Europe with a pretty decent per diem to try and track down any surviving members of the Ahnenerbe SS and the Nazi archaeological department and see if they would agree to be interviewed for British television. which is the thing that started me down this somewhat perilous trail. Of course, by the time I found what I was looking for, there was no one at the network who was
going to take it on,
was prepared to take it on, which meant that I had to continue on my own. The result was the documentary, The Secret Glory, that was made in 1998. But that's very far from the end of the story. All of this effectively damned history has just been left to lie, and Rand's claims haven't been taken up or investigated.
No, not at all.
People still kind of dismiss everything that Rand was about, mostly because of the deal with the SS. He ended up working for the Nazis, therefore nothing he writes or says can be admissible. And I kind of accept that. But at the same time, attempts to get independent analysis by accredited archaeologists and historians to confirm Rand's findings just haven't happened. I mean, I took our friend Yuri Stoyanov from the Warburg Institute through the cave system, and although Yuri's not a trained archaeologist, he's a
very clever guy.
He's probably the smartest man I know, and he's certainly been through similar initiatory cave systems in Bulgaria, and he was able to basically confirm my suspicions that the carved sconces and niches in the walls, the steps, and the various other bits and pieces do correspond to the 12th century or early 13th century. And whatever has been going on in those caves has been going on for thousands of years. The dolmen, or the altar in the Bethlehem.
Christ, that's far more ancient.
Yeah, super ancient, way before before the Cathars or the heretics. So yeah, I think there's real merit to Rand's claims.
But you know, again, unfortunately, you then come into the sinister element that works against you. Again, I'm not talking about just us. You know, some very well-known authors, I mean, whether they're known in America, but in England, there was a guy called Nicholas Goodrick Clark, who was a very, very serious researcher who did a number of top-level academic books. All of a sudden, he became under attack because he did the definitive theoretical book on Nazi and the occult, or the Nazi occult angle.
Yeah, the occult history of the Third Reich is the book that he's talking about.
You know, and all of a sudden, a world-renowned historian is suddenly torn to pieces because he dared to write a book about Nazi interest in the occults. A couple of fairly well-known publishing companies in Canada, aren't they?
Well, I think you're referring to the attacks that were leveled against Inner Traditions, which is the Vermont-based publishing company that published the English-language copies of Crusade Against the Grail,
which was Otto's first book.
Otto Rand's book about the treasure of Montsegur and the secret of the Cathars. And another person who is sucked into this through the attacks on Inner Traditions is Professor Jocelyn Godwin, who again is certainly by no means a neo-Nazi, nor someone who is in any ways promulgating anti-Semitic or neo-Nazi views. But Professor Jocelyn Godwin and Nicholas Goodrick Clark are serious historians, and a book like The Occult History of the Third Reich is utterly factual. And
it's not the content. I don't think that people even read the content to make an opinion. It's the mere fact you've got the temerity to write about this subject that they have decided can't be broadcast, can't be discussed, doesn't matter what it is. It's simply, no, this has now got to be erased from history. What they may or may not have done 80 years ago, what they may or may not have thought 80 years ago. Totally irrelevant. You can't discuss it. And if you're involved with it, and if you have even a passing interest in it, well, very clearly you're a Nazi or some sort of neo-Nazi sympathizer. It's mind-boggling. Until you're actually part of it, you just simply can't believe that this can actually happen. But it does. You know, there's been efforts to try and stop Richard's book getting out there, which is why we've had to self-publish and fund it all ourselves. It's absolutely farcical. It really is.
On that subject, we
moved on. Yeah, I mean, very, very quickly, because I know time is precious. You know, about 2 years ago, we were sitting talking, and it actually was, well, like, hang on a minute. the Otto story hasn't actually gone anywhere since he died in 1939, and we said, well, somebody ought one day to write Crusade Against the Grail 2 and try and factually just lay out in simpler terms what he was writing about. So in about the 100 yards between the pizza shop and Richard's house, it's like, well, I think we'd better do it. So we spent a year retracing Otto's routes around Occitania, all the places he visited in himself, and we then put this one together, Crusade Against the Grail 2, which isn't copying his work, but he's trying to put a little bit of a modern spin on it, explaining all the castles he went to, why they're relevant to the story, what's happened subsequent to the end of World War II, and just our own personal experiences. And actually, the real great fun you can have if you're involved in this sort of world. Everybody get off the internet, don't watch TV, come out and go do something. There's so much fun you can have. It's brilliant. So we then came up with Crusade Against the Grail 2. And again, it's all self-published. We've got to do it ourselves because we appear to be any enemies of the state, don't we? Because oh dear, terrible subject, you chaps, can't talk about that.
Yeah,
how honestly, you wouldn't believe it, matey. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, that's the way with hidden history, and particularly the history of occult science, of things that inventions, ideas, and I guess concepts that people would really rather not.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Allow people to know about.
Yeah, the system has decided what history is going to be, what is going to be told, and what's going to be put in the school books, and how kids are going to be brainwashed. They're not allowed to think for themselves or do their own research. Here is the path that you are going to be told, and that's what you have to believe implicitly. And it's unnecessary, but the sad thing is, there are so few people who are prepared to open their minds a little bit and actually, you know what, don't believe us. Totally ignore everything the likes of us say, but go and do the research yourself, because the information is out there if you're prepared to look at it. Also, if you think I'm some kind of tin hat wearing conspiracy theorist, that's great, but just spend a couple of hours doing a bit of basic research on this sort of stuff, and then make a judgment on, what you think about how the powers that be are prepared to manipulate history and all sorts of things. Bear in mind, if they're prepared to manipulate history, what else are they prepared to lie to you and manipulate about? I mean, there's so much coming out about COVID and jabs and all manner of things that people like us thought were mentals, but a year later down the line, what's coming out? We're not going to go down it, but that's where we're at with the powers that be, sadly.
Yeah, well, no comment on that one.
No need to, but it's just, it's what you're trying to say to people is open your minds a little bit and just be prepared to go and think and look slightly outside the box. Go and check information yourself. There is so much knowledge out there that you're never going to be taught unless you go and try and find it yourself. You're never going to see it.
Yeah, generally throughout my life, I found taking the empirical approach and going there yourself really makes all the difference.
Oh God, yeah, cool.
I mean, I love a mystery that keeps giving, and I love a situation where you find something which genuinely doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I'm drawn towards things which I don't know and in which I don't understand. It's natural for me that I want to understand things when there's an anomaly or something which edges into the supernatural, which is all too often the natural universe to the power of 10, and things like Hamilton's Baghdad batteries, or we note the Antikythera device, this Minoan shipping computer from the ocean floor that ended up becoming the main plot spring in the last Indiana Jones movie, The Dial of Destiny. That's a real thing. The Antikythera device
100%.
exists.
Look at it.
I hate to say it's not a time travel device, as the Indiana Jones movie would have you believe, but it is a piece of an ancient computer, a very sophisticated bit of technology from a period of time in which such technology was supposedly did not exist.
Yeah, it's another physical object that you can go and look at. So I think it's on display in one of the Greek museums. Well, here is yet another anomaly that this is a very, very advanced scientific device to enable you to calculate, what is it, routes of the stars, or it's certainly a navigational aid.
It's a navigational aid, I think, from a time period before longitude existed. Because before the invention of longitude, it was a whole hell of a lot harder to navigate at sea.
Oh, correct. You know, we're talking something that's several thousand years before, I think it was Harrison invented the watch that enabled you to calculate longitude. Also, is that correct? In the 18th century. So, if that's accepted as being real, why aren't people prepared to examine other discoveries that are coming to light? And things come to light all the time.
And we're going to attempt to unpack for the general public, I think for the first time, really, the true story of the Tomar Horde, which really was the thing that
Templar, isn't it?
Yeah, the Templar treasure trove that formed the basis for the recent History Channel show Lost Relics of the Knights Templar.
Oh God! I mean, this is a very, very long story because it's a project I've been on for sort of 12 years now. To try and wrap it all up in like 15 minutes. Oh God, we're going to give it a go. But what do we do?
I guess I can start with how it came into my life.
Yeah, that's
I was completely unaware of the Horde's existence, and indeed unaware of Hamilton's existence, until I can't remember which year it was. Must have been
5 years ago.
About 5 years ago. A certain Anglo-Irish Grail historian named Tim Wallace Murphy, who was based in the nearby town of Esperanza, held a little soiree, a private lecture at the castle of St. Feriol to an invited audience. And at this gathering, Tim showed a series of slides of an alleged Templar treasure that had apparently been unearthed in Tomar. And I could see at once from the slides that the relics looked genuine. It was certainly a seriously impressive find. But also from the way Tim presented the facts, it was deeply unclear where the relics were now.
Yeah.
He obviously didn't have them with him, otherwise he would have showed them to the audience. And I think also Tim was very ill-advised in actually disclosing that material to even the invited audience that was there, because not long thereafterwards, Tim was dead. And under rather murky, shady circumstances. And not long thereafterwards, Hamilton contacted me.
He did, yep, that's correct.
And reached out and asked if I would appear on Lost Relics of the Knights Templar.
Correct. Right. Now, I'm Hamilton, and I've spent my entire life being totally anonymous. It wasn't just Richard who didn't know who I was. The whole world didn't until I popped up on TV. But I've been involved in the sort of the antiquities world and the collecting and trading of antiquities and all sorts of things. And quite by accident, and without going into boring details, I ended up in Portugal on the trail of something that I'd been told of that I really didn't think existed, because you heard so many stories of missing Knights Templar, this, that, and the other. You know, we've been hearing these stories all of our life, and these legends have been going on for sort of 700 years. So you sort of think, oh, this is nonsense, really. But I did end up with some very interesting pieces that quite clearly indicated that they were Templar origin. They'd been in Portugal. They'd left Portugal at some point before 1970. Oh, bloody, it was a whole chasing around of what I thought was kind of probably some wild goose chase. But what transpired over a period of years of being a wonderful find, totally unique, there's nothing comparable, of what we've now absolutely established are 100% genuine Knights Templar ceremonial pieces. Very briefly, there appeared to have been a find made in 1960 in a place called Tomar, which is in northern Portugal. Now, Tomar was the capital city of the Templar kingdom within Portugal in the sort of 12th, 13th century. And I'm sure most people are familiar that the Templars basically ceased to exist around, they were officially dissolved in 1314, but the members had been arrested several years before then, and basically they'd gone. And there's always been this rumour that some Templar treasure disappeared from Paris prior to the arrest of the Templars because, well, they'd been tipped off. And it was always said that some Templar pieces came back from the Holy Land towards the end of the Crusading period, when basically the Christian forces were defeated. The Templars brought back with them some unknown treasures that were sacred to them. Now, what I appear to have, the important pieces, are a group of ceremonial vessels, chalices, dishes, plates, all things that are purely ceremonial or ritualistic rather than domestic or utility things. There's some very unusual materials being used, such as obsidian, which it's a very difficult thing to work these days. So going back 700-800 years, to work obsidian with the tools that were available at the time was almost impossible. There's other pieces, nice decorative carvings, there's grave slabs, tombs, little portable altars, all curious things that really don't correlate with anything from what you would call the traditional Christian church of the same period, and nothing else that actually exists, because when the Templars were removed from the face of the earth, shall we say, so was everything they possessed. Everything that was paper, and the majority of the documentation was burnt. Templar symbology on gravestones, on buildings, was defaced. They simply became heretical in the eyes of the church, and the church was all powerful, so they had to be eradicated from history, which is why so much about Templar history is oral and conjecture, because such a tiny amount of actual written evidence survives from that period. Trying to piece together what's factually correct, that you're honestly prepared to stand up and say, this is something I can prove, as opposed to what the majority of people say is, this is what I think or this is what I believe, has been a very long process. And I was on it 10 years before I even revealed to people who know me or friends of mine, let alone going on TV or writing books about it, before I was comfortable to actually say this stuff is real and I'm going to stake my reputation on it, which is how, through television, I then met Richard, and we've been working on it. And what we're doing, sort of, I don't know if the word is cross-pollinates, but certainly we've got a crisscross of interests in the Occitanian region here, and Richard's interest in the Cathars and alternative religions.
Yeah.
And we've been working together now for quite a few years, and it's great.
Well, let's cut straight to the chase here. I mean, I guess the common denominator here is really the Holy Grail.
Yeah. I
mean, I've said it. And rewinding on what you were unpacking a moment ago, I understand that the obsidian has also been matched to a vein of obsidian in a quarry in Jerusalem in the Holy Lands.
Well, there's various aspects to this, because there are two of the Templar hoard vessels that are made from obsidian, and we've matched that obsidian to various types that come from modern day Turkey, that going back to the sort of Templar period, it wasn't Turkey, it was Armenia, but Armenia has vastly shrunk, and the obsidian mines that were in Armenia are now in Turkey. And the work on those two particular chalices does appear to be Byzantine craftsmanship, because it's very unlikely that any sort of more Western craftsman would have had the skills to work obsidian going back to the sort of 12th century, which is where these two pieces appear to date from. Now, there is a third piece that hasn't really been released, and there aren't any photographs existent at the moment, and this is the piece that's going to be the final, I suppose, piece in the jigsaw, I would say. And it's a lot earlier, and it appears to be made of a form of obsidian through which there is a seam of it that's existing, and it is a unique form of obsidian that's only found in a small seam that I think is actually closer to Bethlehem rather than Jerusalem, but I couldn't tell you exactly without going through all of the notes. And it's a vessel. Sorry for being a bit vague, but this is sort of information that we're on the point of, God, how do we deal with this? It's very awkward.
I mean, it's not just awkward. People have been dying because of this.
It's a problematic piece. And when you can refer to, well, it's the Holy Grail. Well, hang on a minute. What actually is the Holy Grail? People have said for thousands of years that, well, it's a vessel, it's a platter, it's a cup that collected Christ's blood. It's all manner of things. The sort of the Grail quest and the Grail hunting can mean an awful lot of things. And there are people who will swear blind that, yes, it's a physical object, and there are other points of view that will say, well, actually, the Grail is something that you find within inside you. So turning around to say, well, these chalices you have, they are the Holy Grail. Well, that depends how you look at it. Of course they're not. They're not. It's not something that Jesus Christ was using, but in the sense of the Templar world going back 700-800 years, these pieces were the most significant things that the Templars owned. They were the purest and most important ritualistic vessels. Now, bear in mind, at the time the Templars fell, they owned something like 15,000 properties between the Middle East and the west coast of Europe in Portugal. And the fact that out of all these 15,000 properties, nothing, not a single item has ever been found other than this Templar hoard that I have that was found buried in Tomar. What you can almost say is, well, if you were a Templar living 700 years ago and you were shown this obsidian vessel as part of your initiation process or as part of your moving upwards within the order of the Templar itself, because we don't know precisely what these were used for, perhaps in your mind that was the nearest thing to the Grail that you were ever going to be allowed to touch. It's all conjecture, and it's how you view the Grail itself. But the quest, I mean, that's what it is. It is the Grail quest, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the quest that ultimately brings us together. And there's many things that can be a Grail that can rightfully be called the Holy Grail, because the definition of what a Holy Grail is keeps changing and has been changing for hundreds of years. In point of fact, it's kind of a pre-Christian symbol that got itself Christianized at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, when the Grail was first introduced to us in Wolfram von Eschenbach's 12th century texts, stone, a black bleeding stone. In Chrétien de Troyes' version, it's a dish, a big golden serving platter with a Christian fish symbol on it, the Vesica Pisces. The dish described by Chrétien de Troyes actually exists and is in the collection of the Louvre Gallery, something that was proven by esoteric researcher Mark Oxbrow. This is rightfully the Holy Grail of Chrétien de Troyes. Then some people say the Holy Grail is the blood of Christ. Well, Dietrich of Alsace brought back what he believed was the blood of Christ and gave it to the town of Bruges. And in the middle of present-day Bruges, there's the Basilica of the Holy Blood. In the middle of it, in a glass tube, of glass phial, is this alleged blood of Christ, which is the Holy Grail of for Dietrich of Alsace, the town of Bruges. They venerate it. It's a little bit like the green gunk you see in the tube in John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. Super weird, but it's there, and almost every day they literally are performing rites to venerate this tube of holy blood, which is legitimately the Holy Grail. The Cup of Valencia has a decent claim on being, if not the Cup of Christ, it's certainly a very early,
years old, isn't it?
proto-Christian ritual vessel, and it's also the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And beyond that, there's the fabled Cup of Abraham, the part of the treasure of the
Second Temple in Jerusalem.
The Second Temple in Jerusalem, the treasure of the Temple of Solomon.
Yeah, but I mean, sort of flicking back onto the Tomar Hoard story, the initial find of somewhere between about 25 and 35 pieces was made totally by chance, we believe in 1960, by some Portuguese youths who were actually searching for Roman graves. The simple reason because Romans tended to be buried with jewelry and coins and valuables, And these little guys were simply looking for silver and gold, anything that could be sold as bullion. And what they actually dropped upon was this Templar horde, which they didn't recognise what it was. I mean, in all honesty, in 1960, it probably had no commercial value at all in Portugal, because simply there was no antiquities trade. Portugal was the poor person of Europe, and unless you had silver and gold to sell, probably an ancient item had no value and no interest. Somewhere before 1970, an awful lot of these pieces ended up in Switzerland with someone who was an antiquities guy who was going to Spain looking for things and came into Portugal. They were split up again, and by the time I got involved 10 years ago, you know, they'd been out the ground 50 plus years and had been dissipated. And somehow over the last 10 years, I've been chasing every lead. And as far as I know, I've pulled in, I don't know if I've got everything because I keep being surprised. And, you know, I don't claim to know everything. I'm learning all the time about it and learning new bits of history, because the stories are all oral from 1960. Nothing's written down. But it does appear to be correct that this main horde was buried in 1960, and I think I've pretty much reassembled everything. But within the last, well, it's only 6-8 months, some other pieces have come to light which don't really fit into the group that I have. The conditions are all much worse of the items. And I was hearing various stories from some Portuguese people, including a couple of academic guys who were very anti-me to start with, but now actually seem to be coming on board, that there was actually an earlier find made in the same town somewhere around 1937, 1938, by a German who just happened to be working in the town and digging, and somehow the Portuguese military got involved and were helping him with the digging. He then disappeared. There was no explanation of what was going on, but lots of stories around the town that somehow the army had found something, there was a great find, and it was all gone, then it was all hushed up. But again, you know, we're now talking something 80 years ago, but this does now seem to have been confirmed. And the separate little group of vessels, of which I think there's 7 or 8 pieces, I've now tracked those down, and most, if not all, fingers crossed, are going to come to me and should be back in a little group within the next few weeks. And that's opened up a complete new line of research, because this crisscrosses with Richard's interest in Otherworld and the hunt for the Grail by the Nazis, and Himmler's interest in the whole Grail story and Grail mythology. So as and when this little group of pieces are sat on the table, we've got a whole new sort of kettle of fish to study and try and bang our heads against the table to get academics to cooperate with us, because really we're in the same position that history of the Templars and the academics who've been involved in the Templar world have preset what they have decided is going to be the Templar history that you're going to be allowed to know about and be taught. And people like us that actually have some factual evidence to put on the table, we'd rather be hushed up and, oh, we should go away. You're a pest, aren't you, going on about your facts and figures?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, there are unscrupulous individuals out there who would like to kill or silence us.
Yeah.
Or at least make certain that anything we turn up is discredited and is not placed before the public. And I think as we've found out, the folk we're up against will stop at nothing.
Oh, there's no limits at all. No.
And the real life circumstances weirdly resemble a sort of cross between not just the Indiana Jones franchise, but the Maltese Falcon. I'm frequently reminded of the basic plot arc of Maltese Falcon, where, as we may recall, everyone is looking for the treasure of the Knights of Malta. Well, in this case, they're looking for the treasure of the Knights of Tomar.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've got our very own version of Caspar Gutman and Peter Larray and Elisha Cook Jr. It's been spectacular. The stuff that dreams are made of, and I guess it's always the case with the Grail Trail. It's the moment you're about to put your hands on the sacred object, the very next thing you hear is the sound of a gun being held.
Somebody wants to snatch it away from you.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just turning the corner now, hopefully. That the last 2 years have been very, very hard, because the problem the academics and the powers that be have got is you can't discredit the pieces because they're phenomenal. We've had some basic scientific study done on a lot of them, the methods of production, the degradation of the materials. Nothing can be criticised. The items are 100% genuine. So you can't knock the item. So if you can't knock the item, what you can do is have a go at the person. So I've had 2 years of people actually trying to discredit me on the basis if Hamilton White's a thicko or he doesn't know what he's talking about, then it's not worth listening to him about his clutter and his objects and anything else he's got. And it's really been digging deep for the last 2 years to try and turn this around. And finally, there are a few people who are now in private prepared to put their hands up and say, well, actually, yes, everything you've said is correct. What you have got is very, very good. And I think within the next few months, there's going to be a sort of serious flip round. And there are going to be some people who are going to sort of now put their head above the parapet and say, well, actually, you know what? This study group really merits some proper attention. And I'm happy to give it. The moment some proper people stop criticising me and stop trying to alter history, I would be delighted if I could get this stuff out on public display. Nobody's seen it for more than 800 years, and it would just be phenomenal if we can get a great exhibition and then everybody can come and make their own mind up. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I genuinely don't know, but everybody should have the opportunity to come and look at this. It's the most important group of Christian, whether it's what you would call fundamental Christianism or slightly corrupted Christian views, I don't know. But the mere fact is it exists, and we'd really love to see it out there in the world. We'd love to get it over to America because I think it would be far more popular and far more open-minded people coming to look at it. But for the moment, we've just done a couple of little books on it, and we're sort of battling on, and hopefully we're going to do a YouTube channel and start talking about the pieces. Because again, trying to get it on TV, trying to get a serious documentary made about it, it's just proving impossible. History on TV, they seem to want lightweight fantasy rather than actual serious, let's try and establish that there's some great history out there. This TV just doesn't seem to want to swallow it. So, there we go.
So, what I have here is...
what's that one?
The
that's
Templars Horde, yeah. Which, is the, I guess, the catalogue of the Horde.
This one here is the book I employed the late Tim Wallace Murphy to write, which it's okay, but, there were problems with Tim. He was at the end of his life. He was trying to rush something through. It's okay. It's basics, and it gives Tim's thoughts on the matter, but it's by no means a definitive thing. So what I then did, I put together more of a simple catalogue, which is actually available. And this is just simply a pictorial thing. I don't know how well this is going to come up on screen, but it's the brief history of the story, a little bit about Tomar. Hang on, let me see if we can find a chalice, as we've been talking about chalice. There we go. And I mean, pictures of some of the items. There's an awful lot of picture of chalices of various sorts. Again, it's not going to be the final book. Somebody more knowledgeable than me than probably come along and do something in the future. But at least it's a little book that's starting to get the story out there. It's all self-published again, because the usual problem trying to get companies involved, you're poo-pooed and you're blocked and you get made promises and they never happen. So at the end of the day, if you don't do it yourself, it doesn't happen, which is very frustrating. But as you know, Richard, if you don't do it yourself, it doesn't happen, does it? Look at Otto Rahn. Do it yourself.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
At least, we're alive, whereas Tim Wallace Murphy is dead.
Tim isn't. Yeah.
Yeah. The Tomar Horde has a body count.
It's a long story that we probably need 10 episodes to go through it in sequence. But yeah, poor old Tim, he was very ill when he was working for me. The circumstances of how he's died seems very ambiguous. The last 6 months of his life how he was out of his house, where he was living. It's all very jumbled up. But the whole story is we've come across so many things in this little sort of weird quest that we've been on that really don't make a lot of sense. You know, if you told everybody, they think you were making it up. They think you're a lunatic. You know, that's a stupid story. That didn't happen, but genuinely it did, didn't it? You know, you know the score.
I mean, it feels as if it's, I don't know, but the last few years I've had the sensation that I was living in some kind of R-rated comic book.
Yeah, it's farcical. Some things have been so absurd, it's almost a comedy program rather than a tragedy. But we're getting there, and you know, if people are interested, if you get some good feedback, we can come dive into the details of the who's and what we've been doing and all the countries we've been running about, and you know, maybe do a program on one specific object or one important thing. I don't know. It's gauging the interest of what people want to talk about, isn't it? Really. We're just starting up a YouTube channel, I am, which is called Hamilton White Uncensored, which has got not very much of me at the moment, but he's got some funny little clips of Richard at Montsegur and doing his stuff, which is really interesting. So if anybody wants to look, we're going to start loading up some more things and some of more of the contentious things in due course. You can buy the books. Richard's got a whole variety of books. I've got some books. I'm easy enough to find. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. You know, if anybody wants to get involved, please feel free. If you've got any ideas, I'm easy to find. Send us some emails. We try and keep on top of things. And, you know, Richard's the same with what you study, isn't it? You know, people are coming to you. You're there. You're not hard to find.
Yeah, well, the quest continues. And I also feel much safer the more that this information comes into the public domain.
Certainly.
Because, you know, provided that nobody knows what's going on, it's all too easy for to simply disappear and for the contents of one's hard drive to disappear.
It's happened.
The rationale behind putting together the Last Crusade, which will be widely available, I believe, next spring in the US from Inner Traditions under the US title Grail Hunter.
Yeah, you know, I mean, people probably turn around and just, oh, you're a stupid pair of fantasists. You know, you're going on about having your computers hacked. You're going on about being followed. It's all real. You know, the men in black are out there. We don't know who sent them. We don't know who's responsible for them. But genuinely, when they turn their attentions to you because there is something that they want to sort of inconvenience you and try to drive you off the face of the earth and shut you up, they've given it one heck of a good shot over the last 18 months. But, you know, fingers crossed, I think we're coming through it now. And, you know, I think it's going to spin. But what we just simply like is to get this stuff out there and let the world see it because it's phenomenal. It's so important. That's about it, isn't it? You
Indeed.
know?
Well, here's to it.
So I think that's about all we can say for the moment. But as we say, you know, if people like these stories and really want to dig deep into it, we could waffle on for hours and hours and start telling the story of individual pieces and how we crisscross from France, how the Templars and things they did in Occitania crisscross with the research we've done in Scotland. Give us a shout. Have they heard enough from us for tonight, you reckon?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're going to bid the world a goodbye.
You have been tuned to Tales from the Otherworld, coming at you from the heart of the Devil's Pentagram. This is your host, Richard Stanley, wishing you all a very pleasant journey home.
Richard Stanley's Tales from the Otherworld is produced by Nerd Horror Media in Los Angeles, California. Horror.